I wanted to start off my presentation to you all by just honoring all those that have come before us, those who called this place home before us. I also want to acknowledge all of those who are going to come after us. So welcome here, right now. It's a very special time in the world, very special time indeed. I'd like to thank my parents for introducing me to nature at a very early age. I also want to thank all the teachers in my life who fueled the passion, gave me something to really run with that helped me get to where I am. What is the earliest memory that you have of a place outside in nature? It need not be up on a mountain, it could be just in your backyard. A place that was special to you. A place that you would go, a place that maybe you weren't too excited about telling other people about, perhaps. Just think about that for a second. You might even want to close your eyes. Go back to that place right now for me, please. How did you feel there? Well, I remember mine. It's the side yard of the first house I lived in Springfield, Massachusetts. There was this sort of bramble beside a fence between the neighbor's yard and ours. And there was a little hole that I could climb into, a little spot. I didn't think anybody else knew about it but me. And I would go into that spot, and when I was in there, I was in a different world. It was a world of my own. I didn't know this at the time, but that was a fairly significant event in my life because I would seek places like that throughout my life. I remember starting school, elementary school. I was the kid that was at the corner of the field, starting to get into the trees, and the teachers calling me back. I'd be the one to be chasing the butterfly or picking the flowers and bringing them into class. I wasn't so interested in playing whatever sport was happening on the blacktop. Remember in middle school, my favorite book that I was introduced to from my middle school library was My Side of the Mountain. That was a life changer for me. For those of you who aren't familiar with that book, it chronicles the journey of a young boy who leaves his home, kind of runs away to the Catskill Mountains. He learns how to get what he needs, and he feels free and uninhibited by the weights of his home life. And that was something that felt really exciting. I remember aspiring for that. And I remember that in high school I had an extremely influential teacher who began to develop a sense of what it means to give back. Because all the while I had been really just cultivating feelings within myself and experiencing connection with nature where I could find it. This science teacher of mine was involved in a study to determine the extent of an infestation of an aphid that came across on some landscape plants from China, I believe. And this creature found a comfortable home in the United States, and the hemlock trees in my hometown were infested with this. And so as a class, we surveyed the hemlock stands in the towns around our high school and determined to what extent they were infested, and worked with a state biologist to potentially save these trees because it wasn't certain how badly the trees would fare. If you know anything about tree cover, and particularly hemlock trees, they're fantastic at blocking out light. They're really dark underneath. One of the functions that they play is that if they're growing over waterways, they cool the water. And cool water can have a higher oxygen content. Higher oxygen content can support a wider variety of fish species. And so all these things are connected. Here I am, a teenager in high school, learning about all this, and also having a connection to the hemlock grove that was in the backyard of where I lived when I was about 5 years old until I left home for college. It was a place that I turned into a fort with my best friend, and so I had a connection to this kind of a tree, my own way of seeking respite and recreation. I had a connection with it because I looked up to this teacher of mine and wanted to participate in this project that she was passionate about. And I wanted to connect with it because I realized that I could play a role in something that potentially impacted more than just me, supporting the health of our ecosystem. There was that point where I had to make a decision. What was I going to do with the rest of my life? That's a hard one when you're in 11th grade, right? Like, come on, who still knows what they're going to do with the rest of their life? I mean, it can be elusive, and there was only one thing that I was sure of when making that decision. That decision was that it would be what felt right. I would follow my heart. And what felt right was to pursue a course of study that allowed me to be as close to nature as possible. And I ended up right here at the University of New England. Before coming in to give this talk, I actually took a little walk right up along that shoreline, visited some places that I got to know really well in the time that I spent here. And I still have a really deep connection to a lot of those places. There used to be a hemlock tree that grew up along that coast. I used to visit it, especially when it snowed. It provided such a thick cover that the snow couldn't penetrate it. So there's a little room under there, kind of reminiscent of that childhood place that I would go. And I would watch the harbor from underneath the branches, not getting snowed on at all. See the boats, the lobster boats, swirling around like weather vanes tied to their moorings. It's not there anymore. It got cut down. I'm not sure what for. It wasn't the prettiest looking tree, but sometimes you have to let things go, and I realize that in life, some things that you're attached to, even if they provide a function for you, even if they have a place in your heart, you can take that strength that you got there, that connection that you got there, and apply that to the next thing. So I'm actually doing that right now. As part of my coursework here at the University of New England, I had to go on an internship, and I ended up in the Sequoia in Kings Canyon National Park in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Here I learned quite a bit about ecology. I worked for the park's fire ecologist and dendrochronologist. He studied tree rings and fire regimes. And a little interesting thing about fire ecology is that fire is actually considered a decomposer in some places where there's not a lot of moisture, especially in the summer times. And I learned that since about the 1900s, we were doing a fantastic job putting out wildfires. But there was an unintended consequence to this effort. Fire was a very important part of this ecosystem, and without it, certain tree species would grow really tall. As they found out, the sequoia seeds need the heat to germinate. They need the ash in the soil to help them really grow up, and they need the clearing of the canopy, the other trees, to get the sunlight to actually make their journey on up. I ended up going back to Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Park several years later for a job, not just as an intern. And I was pretty psyched. That year I was working in alpine lakes on a frog survey, and that's what I would look at every morning for about 2.5 months. Not a real bad job, and spiritually I felt fantastic. Talk about like clearing and just having really deep connection with place, unlike I've ever felt before, getting to spend that much time. And of course, the career path that I thought that I was kind of hitting the mark on, living the life of that character in my side of the mountain, didn't feel quite right. And I wasn't exactly sure why, until I realized that part of what was missing for me was the connection to other people. Edward Abbey writes about this. That towards the end of a long season in the wilderness, he starts longing for that busy pub in Hoboken, New Jersey. Wants to get right back into the rat race just because misses that side of who he is. And I think we all have that to a degree. We kind of need a balance. And so I decided at the end of that season that I was going to go back to college. I was going to pursue a degree in sustainability education. And I wanted to bring some of the experience that I got here and that I got all throughout my life, what I consider to be a very privileged life, to the children that couldn't get out. Because I worked in these parks long enough to get to rub elbows with some of the backcountry rangers, and they said, who's not coming out here anymore? It's the younger generations. We're not seeing them. And so I went from the park here to Portland, Oregon, where I enrolled in grad school and started working with school gardens and garden education. Because wouldn't you know, the closest natural place for schools are the grounds of the schools themselves. And while you might not think of that as a very wild place, there's quite a lot that can be seen, quite a lot that can be tasted and smelled and felt and learned. And so I really committed to working with schools to develop and sustain garden education programs, and also subsequently did some work helping to bring schools to urban farms, because why not, right? That would be cool to actually have your school be a farm. So I work with Mother Earth School right now, and we have 2 farm locations where we run educational programs for preschoolers up to 3rd grade, and it's wonderful. We're actually providing really deep nature connection right in the city. And that's not unique to Portland, Oregon. Portland, Oregon's a pretty green place, I'll admit. It's got its perks, but there are aspects of this that can happen in a lot of places. One of the schools that I was working at had a school garden, and the teachers were having a hard time integrating it into their school day. And I began to understand why. Because if you're a school teacher, and you're planning on going outside for a class lesson, and you're doing your preparation for that, and then it rains out, well, you've got to have a backup lesson for going back inside. And no school teacher wants to do that in their right mind. They're already working too hard. So what they needed was something that could help them go out and not have to worry about the weather. And when we asked the teachers at this school what they thought would do the trick, they said, we'd love to have an outdoor classroom. So how are we going to do that? There's this organization in Portland called the City Repair Project. And this is an example of a social organization that helps support building capacity in communities to do what the vision of that community is, created by the people that want it, facilitated by those who have gone through the process before. And this diagram that you see is a flow diagram that simplifies that process. So this organization, the City Repair Project, and this event, this 10-day event that happened every spring called the Village Building Convergence, kind of works something like this. A group of people have an idea of what they want to do. They start talking. Like, yeah, this is pretty cool. I think we got something here. They invite a couple other people and they agree. All right, we really got something here. They put up a couple flyers, maybe advertise food, because food is a great way to get people to come together. Get a couple people to come and enjoy some food and share some more ideas. And once you feel like you've got a critical mass here, maybe it's time to send it out to the broader community. And as you go through this process, you, as well as nowadays, after 15 years of this event happening, about 40 other groups, just like you in some ways, but very different, are having similar conversations all across the city. What can we do? How can we make our place more representational of who we are and what we're trying to do? Why should somebody else who doesn't even come here plan what it is that we do? Why don't we do this? Why don't we have the right? Well, you do. You just have to claim it. So we planned this outdoor classroom, had a designer design it for us, got an architect to volunteer his services. I personally spent about 15 or 20 hours in the city office getting the permitting stuff done. Some of the parents in the PTA were amazed at how many of the dads came out of the woodwork, because they have to really cajole some of these dads to come to these PTA meetings. They sit in the back, they're kind of quiet, and all of a sudden they're showing up with their tools. It's incredible. So this is the building of the outdoor classroom at elementary school in Portland, Oregon. And there's some of the dads. They wanted to have a concrete floor. It wasn't the favorite aspect of the design, but you got to know what you're designing for. And that's one of the important aspects of being able to find what it is that you're trying to do, figure out the best way to do it, and then go ahead. So what are they designing for? Well, they wanted a low maintenance floor, and that's really great. They also wanted to have an eco roof, which is really fun too. You see in the picture there that they're installing that. One of the neat spin-offs of this project, some of the folks that put together that eco roof ended up forming a business as a result of this volunteer effort. So this is the kind of social capital and some of the stuff that gets generated with these kinds of community projects. The City Repair Project in this 10-day event, the Village Building Convergence, supports a lot of other kinds of building projects. In these photographs, there's an example of another outdoor classroom at a high school. This one's built with round wood and cob bench built on a urbanite wall, urbanite being broken up pieces of concrete. It's a resource in a lot of cities. Something as simple as an information kiosk. The design question for that community would have been, how can we share information about what's going on in our community? That's what they're designing for. Perhaps these ladies were asking, well, how can we get folks to come over and share space with us? Let's really exploit that food piece. Let's build an oven and share food and share community. And that's really been the key to a lot of this community work, sharing something. What started a number of these projects was actually a guerrilla art painting, a guerrilla mural that happened in an intersection. This isn't a painting of that exact one here, but this is in a neighborhood in Portland that was responding to having to take down a community structure that wasn't permitted, that was becoming a really popular community space. This group of neighbors discovered that if they created a space for community to happen, and they served tea and served food, people would show up and they'd enjoy that. They'd invite their friends, and before long, this little hand-built structure that was put together with mostly recycled doors and windows and old sails and plastic and things. It was really this hopping place. They had potlucks on Mondays. They called them the Moon Day potlucks. Well, the city made them take it down. Neighbors were like, well, they don't get to decide what we do here. This is our neighborhood. we're going to go ahead and leave our mark. This is our neighborhood, and they painted the intersection. And the city obviously wasn't very happy about that, except that somebody thought that would be a good idea to survey the impact of the original mural in that neighborhood. And wouldn't you know, that mural that cost the city nothing provided similar services, similar functions to what the city spends thousands of dollars of trying to do, with slow down signs and speed bumps and like all this stuff to try to get traffic to slow down, reduce accidents, reduce crime, reduce vandalism. The winning recipe here, it's not that complicated. It's getting the folks that might otherwise vandalize it involved in the process to begin with. They're the ones that are going to defend it. What aspect of resiliency are we lacking or do we not have currently? If you were to go home and assess where your food's coming from, where your water's coming from, where your power's coming from, what services you need and where you have to go to get those, you might come to a similar conclusion than I did, which is that a lot of them come from really faraway places, and I'm really not relying on any of my neighbors in my immediate community for providing them. And with a little bit of intentionality, and with the support of some social organizations that have gone through this a couple of times and know a couple of tricks about it, we can begin to dig in a little bit deeper where we live. Something as simple as an asset mapping exercise of who lives around you and what services they provide. And then just providing that asset map to the neighbors in your community, that alone is a fantastic boost in community resiliency, because now you know what services can be provided and who are resources for what you might not have even known that before. And living in cities, and with more than half the world's population now living in a city, we are actually more isolated than we have ever been. We see a lot of people all the time, yet we're really disconnected. And so how can we break down the barriers, which is essentially the design of a city? You've got the grid of streets. It's an island effect. It was designed by the Roman Empire so that resources and military forces could get from point A to point B as quickly as possible. How can we take that grid, that design that's imposed on the cities, and change it, transform it to something that can actually facilitate communication, facilitate exchange, and support community strength and vitality, have an educational value, and begin to rekindle, redevelop some of the things, some of the aspects of community that maybe our parents or grandparents experienced. Community is inevitable. We really just need to let it happen. And if we give ourselves the task moving forward from today to take some time to assess how you're meeting your needs, where your support's coming from, what things that you are a resource for, and what services you can provide to your immediate community, you would be doing a great service to building the resiliency of your place. And if you consider the school in your neighborhood as another local resource, another place where some of the knowledge and expertise in your community could find a place, now we're also beginning to fold into the picture how we can view education as a community service and not just a function of what happens inside of a school building. So what I would love to see in this time of crisis, in this time of great change in our country and around the world, I would like to see us all just to take the opportunity to look no farther than who's sitting beside us, look no farther than even sometimes ourselves, for finding out what the next step is. And maybe it's just as simple as being open to have a conversation, meeting the person that you haven't met before, putting aside some of the prejudgments around who somebody is because they drive a vehicle that you don't really like, or they listen to music that you're not too fond of, or whatever it might be, and take a chance. You just might find that that person's got something that will really come in handy for you someday, and vice versa. Thank you very much.